Premier Bros back at you. Today is our second Cypher session. We're going to go deep on Manchester City. We know over the last decade or so, Manchester City has been the dominant club in the Premier League. But this past season, not quite so dominant. And we're here to talk with Mike, our guest analyst on Manchester City, to understand from a supporter's perspective, how does he feel about what's happening in Manchester City and what's the outlook going forward. We know it was an up and down season for Manchester City. Rodri injured early in the season, a difficult middle part of the season, but a rebound towards the end where City finished third and qualified for the Champions League. How do you see it from a supporter's perspective?
This was a difficult season, relatively speaking, given the fact that we've really had an embarrassment of riches as far as success in recent years. Things did stabilize. And we can look back at the performance of the club in the final third of the season and feel somewhat okay, particularly given where we finished. But make no mistake, this was a tough year.
So we saw this being Guardiola's and Manchester City's lowest point total under Guardiola's helm. Throughout the season, we saw Guardiola struggling for the first time. Struggling to deal with the challenges, to find answers to the problems that Manchester City face. How do you see Guardiola's performance this season? Is he still the man in your eyes to take them forward?
We saw a manager in crisis professionally, but also I think personally, and I think that there was that moment when he showed up for the post-game press conference. I can't remember which match it was, when he had the cuts on his face, right? Where people were, is Pep okay? We know that his marriage essentially fell apart early in the season. The rumors are that that was related to his decision to stay. And, this was supposed to be his last year. He was supposed to go out on hopefully a high note, right? I think probably at the start of the season, he was thinking about maybe not another treble, but certainly a second Champions League victory might be on the table. And that all went sideways. But Pep being Pep, he's very obsessive, he's very committed, and he made the decision to extend. You get the feeling that he did that because he wanted to bring the club back from its missteps, and he really does want to finish on a high note and leave the team in really a great condition. But again, watching the club week in and week out, it's very obvious that he's been really struggling this season. He is a manager who loves control. He wants his team to have control at all times. He has a reputation for overthinking, but that's often worked out in his benefit when he's made minor tweaks that in retrospect have proven to be tactically astute. What we saw in the entire second half of the season is a very incoherent set of personnel decisions, game by game, in terms of the team sheets. It's hard to know what he's really trying to accomplish in any one situation, in any one game. Just speaking as a supporter, that might be the most worrying thing, is that nobody knows what his plan is for next season.
If he were to step aside, would you feel comfortable with that, or would you want him to stay on?
At this point, the team is synonymous with him. It's very hard to imagine a Manchester City with a different manager. Pep has put himself in the position of overseeing the rebuilding of the team. And so he's going to rebuild the team and then he's going to leave. That basically means that whoever the next manager is, they're going to have to share aspects of his vision. Tactically, they're going to have to be on the same page. I do think that somebody like Vincent Kompany would make sense. He has a lot of parallels to Pep in how he likes to manage his team. What we saw with Bayern and before that with Burnley is, really a possession-oriented approach to football. And then, of course, he is a City legend and somebody who's remained really close to the club, who knows the city, who knows the Premier League. It's not going to be a situation where you can bring somebody in with an entirely different system after whatever happens this summer with 2, 3, 4 instrumental pieces brought in to sort of rebuild the team around. You're not going to then bring somebody in who has a very distinct philosophy and approach to the game and saddle them with the previous guy's players. We've seen that at other clubs. I know, Chad, you're a Man United supporter, but I think arguably there have been transitions that have been really difficult when a new manager was brought in and handed a bunch of large contracts, large egos, and and players with distinct attributes who may or may not work together on the field. So that's what we don't. That's what we can't do, and that's what we don't want.
You wouldn't want Pep to stay on for another 4 or 5 years.
No, I don't think that would be good for him. I don't think it would be good for City. A lot of people that I watch games with, talk to, I think that really what he's experiencing is burnout. And another 4 or 5 years of Pep, I don't think is the answer.
Rodri was injured at the beginning of the season. We know that part of the decline in Manchester City is due to his absence, but there were some other players who didn't quite perform at the level we would expect, like a Phil Foden, even Erling Haaland. When you think about the Manchester City team not reaching the heights that were expected this season, who were the players that disappointed you the most and why?
Yeah, you mentioned the obvious one, which is Phil Foden. And after the season that he had last year, where he was looking like one of the best midfielders in European football, a lot of us really felt like he had matured into the player that we all knew that he could become. It's been really difficult to watch him struggle this year. We're looking at him as really the player who's going to sort of carry the standard for the team going forward. With De Bruyne leaving, Foden supplied a lot of our goals last year and a lot of our offense. And if you look at City during Guardiola's tenure as coach, there's always a different player who's hot. There were seasons where it was like Bernardo Silva, who I think has scored 1 or 2 goals in the last year. There were years where it was Raheem Sterling, or it was Mahrez, right? You didn't necessarily know who it was going to be supplying those goals. Last year it was Foden, and that left a gap for us this year. Collectively, the team there's a lot of players who just didn't really play that well. It's not just Foden. You mentioned Haaland. A lot of the issue with Haaland is that he just doesn't get service. That's really a result of a tactical mismatch between him and the way that the team is set up. With De Bruyne still in his prime a couple of years ago when we won the treble, it made up for that because De Bruyne was a player who could provide the service to Haaland, and he also had a willingness to play risky progressive passes. He really papered over a problem, which is the fact that we play very methodically, very possession-based. We don't counter quickly. We don't have moments of productive chaos in our offense. And those are the situations in which a player like Haaland thrives.
Erling Haaland, he never really struck me as the typical Guardiola signing, a typical Guardiola type of player. It also brings to mind a player like Jack Grealish, who also I wouldn't classify as a typical Guardiola kind of player, and he's been frozen out of the team this season. How do you see the treatment of Grealish? And is he a player with a future at Man City?
If you think about what must be going through his head, he certainly has not been given any indication recently that he is a future, a player with a future at Man City. And when at the FA Cup final, Pep brought in a teenager, Echeverry, the so-called right-footed Messi, who had never played any minutes in the Premier League for Man City to that point. And in bringing him on, Pep overlooked Grealish and others. Then in the next Premier League game, he brought Grealish in for garbage minutes, for 3-4 minutes at the end. And a lot of people are saying that's sort of like insult to injury if you're choosing an untested teenager over a guy who really was integral to the best season that the team's had, doing things that Pep wanted him to do, which were not the things that came naturally to him, and certainly were not the things that he was doing for Aston Villa. So up until more recently, when we've had the emergence of these young, dynamic wingers who really seem like they have the green light to take men on 1v1, Doku and Savinho. Prior to that, Pep was really relying on his wingers to maintain possession. Bernardo Silva and Grealish, that was really their main role, was to sort of stabilize the team. And basically they're there to stretch the defense and create pockets of space, then the half spaces, which is really where Pep wants the attack to happen. Grealish did that exceedingly well. It's very hard to get the ball off Jack Grealish. If you try, you're going to foul him. I mean, I think he was like the first or second most fouled player in the Premier League for a couple of years in a row. And part of that might be that people just, he annoys them. There might be a little bit of that as well. But he's extremely good at keeping the ball. What we saw with him was that he was doing that to such a degree that you really didn't see him attacking, taking the ball to the byline and then cutting it back to create assists, coming onto his right foot for a shot. I think that that kind of attacking aggressiveness was really conditioned out of his game to a large degree. So it's a little bit ironic that now, we have wingers replacing him who that's what we're expecting them to do. For Jack Grealish, after the way that the season ended and being overlooked in the FA Cup final, if I were him, I would be looking for somewhere else to go.
Yeah, Grealish, he must be a sad character now that he hasn't been able to contribute. When we think about players going out, we're talking about Grealish perhaps moving on. The team is aging. We know Bernardo Silva, Ilkay Gundogan, Kevin De Bruyne, all on the wrong side of 30. Who are the players that you think Manchester City should be looking to move on this summer?
John Stones, maybe headed somewhere else. His career has become really just injury plagued. When he's been healthy, he's been so good for City. Going back to a couple years ago when I guess it was Haaland's first year, halfway through that season, tremendously successful season, but he wasn't getting service. The offense became kind of static, kind of stagnant. Pep made a couple of adjustments, but one of the things he did is he started playing Stones at right back and then moving him into a double pivot position where he actually had free reign to progress the ball. And what we saw is Stones carrying the ball up into the midfield and joining the attack. That made a huge tactical difference. That, to me, more than anything else, was the tweak that Guardiola made that turned that season around and allowed us to win the treble. He's a great player. He's a genuine, tall, strong center back who has the feet and the agility of a midfielder. And he's been a real asset. Just too many injuries. So he might go. Bernardo Silva, every year we get to hear about how Bernardo Silva might be leaving. He is a player who I don't think it's really his age because his work rate is just unreal. Still, he's a player a bit like Grealish. It seems like he's stagnated in City's offensive setup. He's not really creating chances. He's not scoring. He's doing lots of other things, lots of intangible stuff. But he's a player that I think a lot of us are thinking very well might move on, and that might not be the worst thing. For me, Gundogan was very disappointing after getting him back. He basically doesn't have the legs anymore. It's really a number of players. And then Kevin's already left. And then we need to replace Kyle Walker. And so those are going to be the priorities for us. So right now, the offer is out to Ryan Cherki, our main target for replacing De Bruyne. And then Reijnders is really a Gundogan replacement. Very similar to Gundogan, younger, faster, bigger, stronger, but quite similar in terms of the spaces that he occupies and what he provides. So those are the players, that we need to replace.
You mentioned Kyle Walker, right back. We know he jumped ship in mid-season, asked to leave the club on loan at AC Milan. Who are you thinking is a potential good replacement for him?
I believe Livramento is a target. Cambiasso was talked about a lot. And then Aït-Nouri is a wingback who is also a target. High quality player who would also just fit right in at City, given his technical attributes. A lot of us would like to see the defense stabilized even more than it was in the January window. That was really where the team fell apart this season. That really has to be the first priority, because if you're just leaking soft goals every single game, then it doesn't necessarily matter what you're doing in your attacking midfield.
You mentioned the January transfer window, and the team made some powerful moves, bringing in Nico Gonzalez and Omar Marmoush. And Marmoush certainly hit the ground running. What's your assessment of him, and how do you see his inclusion in the team adjusting the role of Erling Haaland? Because City don't have a replacement center forward, right? So is Marmoush the answer? What's his role going forward for City, in your view?
I think the idea behind the Marmoush signing was this belated recognition that player who we lost and didn't replace was Alvarez, who was actually fairly important to our offense last year. And so a player who could play in the kind of central attacking midfield, could play as a second striker. If Haaland's injured, can be striker, but we can also play him along with Haaland, and he can drop a little bit into the midfield. He can play off of Haaland. He can help us in our press. I think for the most part, that's the player that we've gotten, because Pep has such a specific system and really wants players to play within that, to do specific things that might not come naturally to them. You often see there's just this adjustment period. And so a lot of us are just wondering, okay, so far Marmoush has been pretty good. he's had these games where he's been fantastic, but then he's also had games where he seemed a bit off, not entirely comfortable. And so I think a lot of us are just waiting to see what he's going to provide us next year. But technically, he's clearly great. The other players that we acquired in January, though, I think are all question marks. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier with Pep and wondering what Pep's trying to accomplish with the team, because we got a Rodri replacement in Nico Gonzalez, very much one-to-one replacement, definitely a player who is comfortable going into more of an attacking role, but who also the strength, the physicality, the ability to keep possession and make and really the decision making ability to play in that pivot role. So we get him, and a lot of us are thinking we've been just hemorrhaging losses since Rodri was injured, but now this is going to sort of stabilize. And then he hasn't become a fixture. Sometimes he starts, sometimes he doesn't. Many of us would like to see him starting every game. Khusanov is even more puzzling because he had the worst debut you could imagine. But then after that, we saw him put in some really strong defensive performances, and then he just disappeared. So yeah, that January window that seemed very emphatic. It was our biggest January window since Pep has taken the reins. We had high expectations for it, and then it's been very confusing what's happened since then.
So, Mike, are there any players on your mind that are on your wish list that you think would bring the necessary quality or fill the void of the players who we think are going to be leaving next season?
Well, for me, it starts with the wing backs. So many of the goals that we conceded this year were goals that came from crosses to the far post. We need players who are genuinely experienced in those roles, in those wide areas defensively. And you did see more of those goals conceded in the final third of the season, especially with the emergence of Nico O'Reilly, who has been a real bright spot this season after he came into the team, has been really excellent. But you need players in those. You can't just take midfielders and stick them in there. You can't take Rico Lewis, a player who is diminutive in size. His skill set is keeping the ball and attacking in really tight spaces. He's somebody who's actually excellent, against a low block in an advanced midfield role. He's not a defender. He's not somebody who has the experience or the instincts or the physical attributes to play that position. So it's not at all surprising that we were giving up so many goals from those far post runs. So for me, that's the priority. With Kevin De Bruyne leaving, we're going to need a number 10. And that's a tremendously important player. It's also, it's an acquisition that you want to be very intentional about in terms of how we want the team to play going forward. I think Wirtz would have been a really good fit. Ryan Cherki is intriguing, really big upside, super creative player. I get the impression that he's a player who can break down low blocks fairly well, which is really what we need. At the same time, he doesn't do any defending whatsoever. I mean, we're not going to get an asset for our pressing. We're not going to get a guy who's going to win duels or make tackles in the open field to stop the counter. And then you move past him, and there's Gibbs White, Eze, whoever we get. Somebody's going to fill Kevin De Bruyne's shoes. Let's be honest about that. Whoever we get to play in that role is really going to be integral to kind of the attacking identity of City going forward. So there's a lot at stake in that acquisition, whoever it might be.
You mentioned different potential number 10s coming in to bring the creativity back to the team, but what about Phil Foden? Can he play in that 10 role and fill the void created by an exiting Kevin De Bruyne?
What we saw with Foden is that when he is played in more central roles, that's when we saw him really become so dangerous for us in the previous couple of seasons. And he's great out on the wing, and that's where he started, but he can disappear out there. When you move him inside, he becomes this destructive force because he's a slashing player with and without the ball. He really knows how to exploit those small moments of indecisiveness, those positional gaps in a defense. If you look at the goals and the assists that he creates, it's just pouncing on those moments of disruption. Now, the problem is that as a manager who really wants control and wants possession, he doesn't fully trust Foden in that role. And that's clear. Foden is not as sure of a hand at the game management, linking play, keeping possession. He does turn the ball over in bad spots from time to time. Every player has pros and cons. And maybe you just live with that because you get so much from a Phil Foden who is playing in the central and is feeling confident and is feeling opportunistic. But I don't see, certainly after this season, Foden has been very uneven in his fitness and in his performances. I don't see Pep trusting him with that kind of really important central attacking role.
We've talked a little bit about Kevin De Bruyne in passing, but we know Pep Guardiola and the hierarchy at Manchester City made a big decision not to renew his contract despite Kevin De Bruyne wanting to stay and continue with Manchester City. You mentioned he's your favorite player, obviously a Manchester City legend, a Premier League legend. How do you feel about that decision?
If he had wanted a 1-year contract, we should have given it to him. 2 years, maybe not. But, these are business decisions. A player like De Bruyne, if he had wanted to stay another year, we should have kept him another year. I think the ideal situation in players like that is if they can sort of gracefully transition into a role where they're coming off of the bench, where they're working with a new player who will eventually completely replace them in that role and smoothing that transition. I think that's sort of the ideal thing.
We talked about potential signings. You mentioned Cherki, possibly Morgan Gibbs White. You talk about the signings that were made in the January transfer window. Marmoush coming in. A lot of players that could be on the roster and that are already on the roster. So I'm curious, in an ideal world, what would the starting lineup for you be next season?
You mean like if we could get the players
bearing in mind the players that you are linked with now. So let's say you bring in Cherki. How does he fit in to that starting lineup with Phil Foden, Rodri back in the lineup, Reijnders coming in? What does that starting lineup look like?
It's interesting because this weird thing happened the other day where Pep basically he made this interesting comment. He said that he wanted a smaller squad next year and that he would quit if he had to deal with this kind of bloated, which was really interesting. It was interesting for a couple of reasons, but I think that part of it was almost an explanation for, I think, a bit of mistreatment of a player like Jack Grealish and other players who he actually said got players who are not going to play, and I can't do that to them. I'm going to say a couple of controversial things. I think that we should not start Erling Haaland every single game. I just think that it just becomes too predictable. If he's starved of touches, then we're playing essentially with 10 men. His movement off the ball, I've noticed, has sort of gotten more sporadic. For a while, he was making these amazing runs, and he's not always making those runs anymore. And he's become more static, more stationary, and again, it's too predictable. So if we have a player like Marmoush, who certainly could probably do very well as a false nine, by just playing Haaland every game for 90 minutes, just sort of sitting up there waiting, I don't think it really helps City that much. And so that would be something I would like to see next year. I think that Nico Gonzalez is a great player. I'm really curious what it would look like if we put him either in a double pivot with Rodri, or if we played him as a number 8 in between somebody like Ryan Cherki and Rodri. I just think he's kind of got a unique set of qualities. He's a big guy, strong, physical guy, but also very much a finesse player. Extremely good on the ball, makes good decisions, sees the field well. I want him on the field. I want him on the pitch. So I think that a starting 11 where you start Haaland, we have to have at least one of those two wingers, either Doku or Savinho, on the pitch. Pep is not okay with having both of those young wingers who are going to turn the ball over and not necessarily get back on defense. They're going to leave us exposed. A talent like Doku, so much of our creative offensive production lately is coming from him. Because we're playing against a low block so often, what you see is an automatic double team on him every single time, which leaves gaps in other places. I would prefer to see him or Savinho always starting. Rodri's obviously going to be our number 6, and then we need a better option in the back. Like Aït-Nouri at left back would be great. I would prefer to see Khusanov paired up with Diaz as our center backs, and then Guardiola can play at the other wing back position, which he has already shown that he's really capable of doing. And that'll also give him more leeway to move upfield and join the attack.
One thing you didn't mention, Mike, is the goalkeeper. We know Ederson was on the transfer rumor mill last summer, thinking about going to the Saudi Pro League. I don't know about this summer. I haven't heard anything, but do you think Ederson is still a top drawer keeper, or should Ortega have that spot, or maybe another keeper altogether?
Ederson had a number of really poor performances this year where he was turning the ball over unaccountably, mental lapses. We've seen a little bit of that from him in the past, but it seems like we're seeing more of it. And so then Pep started Ortega. We saw some of it from Ortega as well. And all of a sudden, then we were in the situation where it was like, who's our number one? You didn't know who was going to be starting for a while. I feel like with goalkeepers, I think there needs to be a degree of certainty about who your starting keeper is. And what we've seen is both Ortega and Ederson are kind of a bit flawed. So they're making moves right now for a new keeper.
Ahead to the upcoming season, what is the expectation for your team? What are the targets in the 2025-26 season?
It's so hard to say. The range of possibilities just seems very wide at the moment. I could see another great year for City. I could still see that even after, the way we stumbled this year. I could still see, okay, we have Rodri back. We have a number of young players who've been really maturing. Talked about Doku. Since Doku joined the final touch, just getting better and better. His decision-making is getting better and better. He's only, going to get more dangerous. O'Reilly, Guardiola had a tremendous season. Nico Gonzalez. We have so many young players and new players who I could see coming together into a team that would win the Premier League. I really could see that. As good as Liverpool are, and as good a job as Slot's doing, as good as Arsenal is, but I could also see, I hate to even think about this, but I could see something similar to this year, but it would be even worse for it happening a second time. And that is because I think so many of our issues are rooted in Pep's own sense of well-being and his own confidence, his own mentality. Where he goes, we go. He is City. And so many times in the past when we've had these kind of, we had good seasons, but then we drop a few points. We, lose usually to Crystal Palace, like away. Even no matter where they were in the table, they would steal points from us. We'd stumble. But you could always say, all right, well, we got Pep Guardiola. He's going to figure it out. And he always has figured it out. This year, he didn't really figure it out. And next year, if we have more injuries to key players, if something gets off kilter, and I hate to say it, but I could see another season like this one, or even potentially worse. We're still a very, very good team. Haven't dropped into the mid-table. We didn't drop out of the Champions League, but this is a moment of change. And so I almost feel like the actual result next year is not as important. It will be more the sense of cohesiveness that you see on the pitch from the beginning of the season to the end. That's what really I'll be looking for. And if we end up in fourth place, there are City fans who will be, losing their minds. I won't be. If what we see on the pitch looks good and makes sense, this is a little bit of a rebuilding year. Next year, we're going to be back in a position to win the Premier League, maybe win the Champions League. Then I'll be happy. I think that's really, for me, that's the important thing.
I have one more very, very, very quick question.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Just because I have to find a way to work my boy into the equation, and that's Cole Palmer. So I've been dying to ask a Man City fan about Cole Palmer. What do you think of City letting such a talent, a generational talent like Cole Palmer go?
So, I'm really glad at least that it's not like November, December when we're having this conversation, because at that time I was going crazy. Cole Palmer was completely unplayable. So in the City supporter chats and at the pub watching the games, the thing that was so painful about seeing how well he was playing for Chelsea for the first 2/3 of the season was that he really looked like the De Bruyne replacement. He looked like in many ways like a young Kevin De Bruyne, unleashed, right? And clearly at City he was in a cage. He wasn't going to break into the first team past Bernardo Silva, past Foden, but more than that, his creativity was inhibited. And then you see him in this loose, crazy system at Chelsea, right? Where it's sort of like, Chelsea to me, okay, they look like the world's best pickup team. You know what I mean? Like, you know, it's like, what are they doing? What's their system? Have these guys played together before? But they're doing, you know, but they have the freedom to really be aggressive, and so they could be really good and really formidable. Now, what happened to Cole Palmer in the second half? I do not know. He lost his confidence. Something happened, and so this is an easier conversation to have now. But yeah, he was too good for us to let go. I feel like we dropped the ball there, and now how badly we dropped it, like you'll see in the years to come.
Mike, it's been a great chat. Thank you for joining, and we hope to have you return at some point in the near future and give us your thoughts on City's progression or lack thereof, depending on how the season goes. But yeah, it's been fantastic. Thanks once again.
Thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'd be happy to do it again at any time.
Thank you, Mike. I echo the thanks.
Premier Bros Cypher session, Manchester City featured Mike. Catch you on the next episode.